Hello and welcome to episode 28 of The Dive. We have switched cities. We are now in quarterfinals. We're in Kobe's hotel room in Guangzhou on a beautiful Tuesday evening.
Gorgeous.
I have set up the audio
Tuesday
myself,
evening.
and we have random radio waves coming through. Hopefully those aren't on the track.
Yeah, they are just on Kobe's Apple earphones. Or
We
whatever
also have Deficio joining us. Speak up, my friend.
Hi guys, glad to be on the show after Europe's fantastic week 2. That's actually why I delayed being on from last week, because I knew week 2 would be peak performance, so I could be here now.
You sent us Vedius to be
There you
like,
go.
well, just in case they
I
don't come back.
sacrificed him.
It's
Now
because
we
he
got
wasn't
Deficio.
casting any of the week 2 games for
It's
Europe.
true. I only
And
had
now
Fenerbahce G2.
You're casting both of the quarterfinals.
I know. The European fans are already basically writing to me like, no, don't do it. But I don't have a choice.
Yeah. Today we're going to talk about a little bit retrospectively at the group stages of kind of why some of the things went down and then preview the quarterfinals right after that. But I think the biggest question that we can cover right at the start, I know it's one that most people have been talking about, is why is it that European teams consistently make quarterfinals and so many North American teams don't? Just wanted to kind of open the floor so we can send some thoughts and speculation towards why that happens. Deficio, start with the superior region in Europe. And just to be fair, like, I don't think anyone on this table is going to try and make a claim that NA has been better, because clearly Europe has been better based on the performance as far as making it to the quarterfinals at Worlds.
Yeah, I think there are a few different, actually there are many different things here. There's probably not 100% right and wrong answer either. I think with European teams, one reason for them kind of showing up big time doing Worlds or showing up more doing Worlds, is that in Europe, I feel like still for some of the teams, the scrim culture is not the greatest in terms of getting the maximum out of your scrims. And then when these teams show up and boot camp against some of the best teams in the world, they kind of buckle down and really give it 110% and really start like focusing on actually improving. They learn a lot. They get really punished for their mistakes, which they don't always do back in Europe. I think Fnatic, with Rift Rivals was a good example of that, where they played one style. No one kind of found an answer to it until NA teams did. That's something where I felt like maybe if the practice had been higher quality, it could have changed earlier. But then now doing Worlds, I see a lot of these teams suddenly go in and be like, wow, we just learned so much from scrimming this Chinese team or this Korean team. And we never really got punished this way before. Now we're going to pick up a lot of these things because European teams have a lot of players with very high ceiling, I feel like, in terms of individual talent. So when they get challenged, they actually improve a lot, especially during boot camps, and they look much better when they get to play doing Worlds compared to some of the regular season games.
It's pretty interesting because there are two things that first came to my mind when you guys brought up this question to me, and one of them kind of does revolve around the boot camp, because another trend that we have seen has been North American teams, at least I always try and reach out during the boot camp, to talk to the players and get as much information as I can so I can, get an early read on the meta or anything like that. And they always are so confident in how their scrims are going. Right. The North American teams specifically, or at least a lot of them at the beginning of the boot camps. And by the way, the meta changes so many times during the boot camp that there are metas that we never even got to see. There was one specifically with, a top lane Karma rushing Ardent Sensor and stuff that it ended up getting smashed in scrims very quickly by people playing split pushers into her, and she could not do anything to Camille and Fiora and stuff like this. But that's just how much change goes on during the boot camps. That has been one thing consistent year to year for me from this sort of question. The other thing, of course, is the week 1 to week 2 performances is such a big difference between the regions, and we have actually so much data on it now that it almost just kind of throws the answer of adaptation in your face.
Yes.
Right? Adapting from week 1 to week 2, and there can be multiple reasons for this, and team specific as well.
Yeah, and I just think that one of the reasons that you see Cloud9, right? They're the one team for the last 5 years, have been quarterfinals. One of the things, especially this year, it's been very obvious, is adaptation. Even in Sneaky's interview, talking about, we got beat by Caitlyn, so I figured, hey, we should probably play Caitlyn. These teams.
Whoa!
This isn't some mind blowing thing, but the fact of the matter is, traditionally, a lot of these NA teams, when you have a good start, you're 2-1. often you need to pick up 1, maybe 2 wins, and you can get out of groups. And just a small change like that can be the difference. But these teams have either failed to prepare or are not confident that they can actually, make these new strategies work in the same way as their opponents. And I think that's one of the things that the European teams have been really willing to do. When you look at these teams, completely changing their styles, whether it failed in week 1 or it worked in week 1, they're still willing to change to what they think is now the new best strategy. And I think that is why they perform better in week 2. And also, you just have to talk a little bit about being kind of clutch.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting talking about how the European teams, Deficio said they practice better at boot camp. You talk to the N8 teams, they say boot camp is great. They say it's super valuable. And then week 1 of Worlds, they show up, which means they actually are getting good practice out of their boot camp. I think the Europeans showing up and being at Worlds greater than expectations can be resulting in that. But I think a lot of NA's failings could come down to getting your strategy set from your successful boot camp, having it reinforced with your pretty consistently successful week 1, and then just sticking with. We see examples of that this year. I think Ryze and Jungle Ezreal were 2 kind of champions that NA prioritized a fair bit that fell behind the meta. Like Ryze was a champion that was pretty good in the mid game. They were never taking advantage of that power spike. They were also never taking advantage of the early Ezreal power spike either.
Yeah, I also think the European teams learn a lot from playing on stage, getting smashed with whatever idea they have of how to play the game with a certain champion or certain style, and then kind of go, okay, that didn't work. We need to now very quickly figure out for the next game or for the next week a different kind of answer. Fnatic obviously was week 1 extremely heavily going towards okay, it's just Reckless. Like Reckless is the one guy who needs to just get fed. Mm-hmm. And week 2 it was a lot more of Caps suddenly actually was much more involved in the game plan.
Brox's Rek'Sai getting Caps ahead in a lot of those games.
Yeah, Broxy picking Rek'Sai every single game and actually being really good on this champion and figuring out how to really utilize the Rek'Sai specifically was a good adaptation from Fnatic that basically allowed them to play much better and actually start winning some games. And I think TSM there is a team who's not doing that very often. I always look at Sven Skaren and I'm like, man, this guy is mechanically so gifted and he's a playmaker when you put trust in him. He's on these scaling champions all the time. It's not really working out for him. They go into week 2, they put him back on the scaling champions every single time again.
Why not try something different?
No one is even for one game being like, let's get a Lee Sin in there, Yeah. Let's just see this guy go off, and then that could be a change.
Right?
Or Ezreal, in Italy, that could be a shift where suddenly they might realize, wow, this actually works super well for us. We should maybe do more of this.
I think one of the key things that you said there was no one brought this up, right? Because something that we've seen a lot is people looking right now just to have a scapegoat and clobber one person and blame a person, whether everybody's got their favorite on the team, right?
Of course.
Going for one person's head. But League of Legends is so much a team game. And if you have this scenario, say, you draft a team where your bottom lane can go ahead and trade super aggressively and earn an advantage that way at the cost of maybe exposing themselves with low health. Now, is it their fault if they mess up a trade and they get dough? Or is it the jungler's fault for not covering that bottom side or invading and tracking the enemy jungler better? Or is it the mid laner's fault for not controlling his lane
or the
and
coach's
warding
fault for
down?
not drafting Galio or something?
Or is it the coach's fault for not drafting differently? Or is it the top laner's fault for not controlling his teleport? And the answer is, it is the team's fault because all these things involve communication between the team to happen. And it also does, again, revolve around practice, this kind of thing that we're talking about, because in League of Legends, decisions come so quickly, you cannot communicate for every decision. You have to have some things practiced in so that they come by nature, because you don't have enough time to have those communications.
Yeah, and also how well do you play as a team? Looking at TSM individually, and I said this last week on the dive where I was really concerned about TSM's performance overall because their international presence was incredibly similar at MSI as it was at the World Championship, where they're incredibly inactive in the early game. They're not making those team plays that everyone else is making, so they just lose, right? And it looks like they're not doing anything because I think normally if this strategy works in North America, they are actually winning the lanes meaningfully enough so that then the team play kind of comes together. Or there is this different mentality on stage where they're just not trying to make the risky play time and time again, but it was just incredibly passive play again and again and again, and it absolutely caught up to them. They had 2 people that got kills pre-15 minutes, a Hanser solo kill and a Bjergsen solo kill in 7 games.
And 0 first bloods.
And 0 first bloods, which is going to happen when you're not killing anyone in the first 15 minutes at all. But there's a bunch of issues, and as you mentioned, it is actually, I think, somewhat difficult to find a definitive scapegoat.
Because I don't think there should be one, right? And at the end of the day, it's a lot like Kobe's saying, it's a team game, and whether or not you agree with, okay, should you play Jace top, or okay, should you play Ryze mid or LeBlanc or whatever it is, you then have to play not only to the strengths of your comp, but to the win conditions that you are then setting out for yourself, right? And if the whole team is not bought into that, if the whole team is not playing around that strategy, it's not going to work. And I think that one of the things to me that almost strikes me like an issue is, if they are really being this successful, you have all these Korean coaches talking up the NA team so much, you have players talking up the NA team so much. If they're being so successful in these scrims, it's almost feels to me like a case of you're too confident in the practice that you had and not maybe recognizing some of the differences between stage games and scrim games, because there is such a thing as being too confident in your preparation and when it's figured out, just saying, no, we just didn't do it right.
I think with a lot of the NA teams compared to the EU teams, NA teams get very scared to kind of take risks on stage. It's rare I feel like there's like one guy really stepping up and saying like, I'm going to make the big play now, I'm going to take the gamble, the 50-50 or whatever it is to try and make something happen. Where both Fnatic and Misfits, who are the 2 teams who made it out, they gamble a lot in-game with some of the moves they are making. They are playing very far forward in specific lanes. They're not afraid of saying, you know what, this might not be the cleanest play in the world, but we need to get this bot lane dive going so we can actually start opening up the game. Individual players or like as a team, they're both doing it.
And also, just quickly on that scrim thing for Israel, it wasn't like anyone was saying like, "Oh yeah, we won all our scrims. We're the best right now." Pretty much all the teams are focused now on how much do you gain out of scrims, right? How much do you learn out of the scrims? Nobody is taking scrim records and like,
I went 10-6 on scrims. That means I will go 10-6 on stage.
Yeah, nobody's like boasting like that or anything.
Yeah, and then the final thing would be, I do sense, and maybe this is just like results-based analysis, a better attitude out of a lot of the European teams as far as, and that manifests itself in willingness to come up in clutch situations, because we had 2 NA versus EU tiebreakers to essentially decide who would be able to get out of group stage when Fnatic smashed Immortals in that tiebreaker and Misfits smashed TSM in that tiebreaker. But to get to a tiebreaker, you have to have the same group result prior to that, and as the group stage progressed, I think the European teams in Fnatic and Misfits consistently iterated and got better and changed their champions and changed their styles. And NA either didn't do that and lost, or in Immortals' case, tried to bring out a bunch of new picks right at the end with like a Trundle Ryze composition, and it was just no synergy, awful, because it seemed like they were mentally broken. So there is that difference in mentality between those 2 squads.
So it's interesting. I just saw there was a really quick Travis interview he literally did with Reggie like right after they lost. That was posted on Reddit. And one of the things that Reggie was talking about was that he felt like TSM had practiced too many compositions and was a jack of all trades and had ended up like that, which was I heard that too. I saw the interview.
It was
curious. Yeah, it was curious to hear because like, remember during the normal season when they're all like, all right, we're practicing specifically as just an example, the Galio mid thing that you're talking about, Azil, they're like, they got flamed by everybody for putting Bjergsen on Galio mid, but then they stuck to it and they practiced it, and they're like, we are going to have all these different strategies for Worlds, because that's what they're always looking towards.
Yeah.
And it became like one of their most fearsome things, and they were actually able to use it to success.
Yeah, and this is almost a little bit of a tangent off that. We were talking earlier about how difficult it is to judge a mid laner's performance based on conventional metrics, because the way people are playing the game is so much different. Like, Xiaohu has the lowest damage percentage of mid laners in the bracket stage, and maybe even of everyone in the group stage. And we all feel like he played super well. And it doesn't show up in laning stats or damage percentage because so much of it.
To be fair, is also champions, right? Like he's played
Galio games twice for sure, and he plays around he plays around bottom lane. But even in team fights, he's like really just making space for Uzi on that team and consistently, roaming down and playing the map. And I think that was when Reddy's talking about kind of trying to be jack of all trades, I don't think they settled on the way you're actually supposed to play the game right now, because they were not shifting their jungle focus with their mid laner towards the bottom side that so many of these other teams are doing. And it was just one of the reasons I feel like they fell apart even more as the tournament progressed.
I'd also say, if you're going into a tiebreaker scenario, even that means, yes, you had the same record, but when you got those wins matters so much too, right? And, and for Fnatic, you talk about mentality, but after week 1, Fnatic seemed mentally destroyed, but then Immortals lose to Gigabyte. Fnatic picks up a win over them in a close game, and you start feeling really, really good. And I think when you're riding high off of a couple wins in a row, you're in such a better position than your opponents who are maybe a little bit mentally defeated, after a couple of losses. And it just feels like they did handle the mental game a little bit better. They're able to bounce back, and the European teams just straight up played a lot better in week 2, and deservedly so got out.
And I mentioned like at the start here, like the ceiling on some of the European players, I feel in terms of individual talent and how they get much better during a tournament. I think it meant that there were some star players who really started having huge impacts in the games, where I felt like on both TSM and Immortals, I was kind of missing that one player outside of maybe Hansa, who tried in some of the games for TSM to really be the one guy you could rely on. Because like again with Fnatic, you had a Reckless in week 1, and then you had a Caps in week 2.
And C9 you had a Jensen, right?
And C9 you had a Jensen,
about
exactly.
Like 40 CS over Westor.
Exactly, yeah. Game. You have Jensen right there, or even Impact in week 1, where he had some standout games. And the same thing for Misfits with Maxlaw playing out of his mind, and Hans Sama having like a breakout tournament. This is a guy who we did not expect to be this good, but on stage, with confidence, he's able to play super aggressive and make big plays. And the European teams have had more of these guys. Perks on G2, another example right there, even though they didn't make it out of groups, who really tried to step up and kind of push the team forward and carry them. And I was kind of missing that on some of the NA teams.
It's funny. Maybe that's born of, NA has usually had, we had the same record every week 1. So maybe if you're pressed harder in week 1, or there's more desperation, right? If you've lost more games in week 1,
maybe, yeah,
then you're like more willing to take chances. First of all, though, I don't want to I know the original question was NA and EU, but the most successful change for me from week 1 to week 2 was actually Chinese team, Team WE, and that was adaptation or innovation, actually. Just straight out of the bat, absolutely crushing with. A lot of the players that we talked to said that Caitlyn wasn't even a pick in scrims, leading up to this. Like they didn't even consider for a lot of them. Yeah. Some of them had, and some of the scrim groups or whatever had been doing it. But jumping on that as a way of counteracting this meta for Ardent sensors, or actually maybe even just playing to it stronger by pushing down for early turret gold and getting your sensor earlier and stuff like that. I just wanted to kind of wrap this one up as how good of an innovation that was, and how much success you can see. Their week 2 actually just stomped the
C9
group, right?
got their win by copying that,
and C9 was able to do it too. Yeah.
The one NA team who adapted.
Yep.
In a lot of ways, and the one NA team who made it out of groups. But quarterfinals, let's start with the one on Thursday. 2 heavy hitter Korean teams, Longzhu versus Samsung. We've talked about most of the teams that are eliminated of the tournament. Let's talk about the teams that are actually competed for the World Championship right now, the important ones, Longzhu versus Samsung.
Yeah, Longzhu was one of the teams we looked at the most coming into the tournament. We were all super hyped about them, about the individual players, but also the team play they had. Obviously, a lot of it in LCK was around Khan, getting him fed in the early game, and then have Prey and Gorilla just always be super solid in their 2v2 lane, and you had this insane setup where everyone was just ready to carry, and BDD kind of took his I'm gonna feed everyone else role. I feel like they have been the best performing team during Worlds so far. You can obviously argue, was the group hard or not, but I think they've looked amazing in terms of clutch shot calling. There have been moments where they're 4v5 and they see enemy team is going to Dragon with too many members. We can rush Baron, even though we have a dead, someone is dead already at that point. And they get the Baron just in the right time, get out at the same time. And they see a lane swap with a Mordekaiser. Instantly adapt and just tower dive him and kill him. They're so quick to adapting to what's happening and make the correct call.
And so decisive.
And then you combine that with the fact they have some of the best players in the world. And I just have this combination that I love watching, and it feels like they can't get surprised. You can't cheese them for some wins.
They almost lost to the Marines, though. That would have been a nice.
That was well played by the Marines, though.
Tibbers for Destroyer Jacket.
And there was no cheese in that game. That was actually like a fairly like standard setup. But Marines just played really well in that game.
It is funny that you talk about like not being able to be surprised, because some of the teams, you hear pro players talking about they don't even know what a champion does literally when it has come out in pro games, because they pay so exclusively attention to the meta that some of these meta breaker type comps and meta breaker type champions can really surprise teams, and a lot of it is learning through repetition. So it'll be interesting to see if anyone is going to bring anything else out that's new. Samsung obviously was a world's finalist last time. People have them as a heavy underdog coming into this. So if there were a time for planning and preparation, you can't hold any cards against a team like Longzhu, who looked like the best team coming out of groups. And Samsung, for them, it may be time to actually try to come up with some sort of strategy that's different, that is shifting from the standard that we've seen in the tournament.
I feel like we might see something come out in answer to if someone tries to play an early shoving Caitlyn lane like that, to be able to lock them out. Like an AD carry with some setup, an Ashe or a Varus. Those ultimates seem great for trying to crack that early on.
I mean, that's the thing we were talking about, like with the Caitlyn. It only ever came out after the enemy bottom lane was locked in, because the Caitlyn will not work against Ashe or Varus, and like Prey and Ruler are two huge Varus players, and I think it's so hard to pull out something against this team. Like, we know Prey and Gorilla are the heart of this team. This is Prey's 5th Worlds quarterfinal. Right? They have been around for so long, seen pretty much every meta. So it's like, oh yeah, the meta is going this way. Well, this is the way that it bounced back last time. So we're already ready for that to come through. Unless the other new guys have limited champion pools that prevent them from adapting in the right ways. Because like there still is technically the same potential weakness for this team of like, what if they need to play tanks to win? What if they need to be able to play these scaling team compositions because they haven't needed to yet?
And I also think that, while Khan is obviously incredible on the carries, Kuve is also extremely strong himself in the top lane. And anytime someone wants to play a carry, that is a lane that you can try to attack. That is a way that you can get an advantage, because, yes, he's incredible at Jace. But if Jace gets put behind, it's a very ineffective champion. And there's ways that you can attack that. We saw an example of that. Misfits did it incredibly well against TSM, put Haunter behind. He was worthless the whole game, and they completely shut TSM down through doing that. And with Longzhu's willingness to actually pick these risky carry top laners, if Samsung could plan around that, if they could draft a winning 2v2 in the top lane and try to get a heavy advantage up there, that's maybe something that you can actually take down to the bot lane and hope to snowball the game.
And just to talk about Samsung in general and their performance so far, to kind of highlight what we've seen, like it's been kind of rough and fairly disappointing, at least for me. I look at this Samsung team, and obviously we know when they play with ambition, it's a team who wants to go late game. They don't want to take big risks in the early game. They just want to get to big fights past 25, 30 minutes and then try and like out macro you late and out team fight you late. They haven't been able to do that against RNG, right. First of all, in their group, where they would always get forced into fights either earlier than they wanted to, or actually just lose the fight they were setting up towards, because some of the individual players like Crown and Ruler have not really been standout. Especially Ruler is a guy who they relied on so much in the LCK, highest damage out of any AD carry during Summer Split, and he was kind of the backbone of the late game team fights. He's not had a great tournament so far. He's not had a good tournament, honestly, so far. And he's one of those guys where if he spent this week and kind of resetting and really hitting like towards his peak level, which can happen sometimes, it can be a mindset shift or just him having a few good days of scrims. If he can show up on the day, Samsung will be a lot more competitive. Otherwise, Prey is just going to run away with this show.
And as far as quarterfinal matchups go, like both of these teams hate this draw. Yes. This is the worst draw for both of them. The only Korean 2 seed and potentially the most fearful number 1 Korean team because they won the LCK. And these teams have been competing all year. There was a best of 3 at the end of the LCK regular season that if Samsung would have won, obviously they didn't, but if they would have won, they would have been the number 1 seed heading into the playoffs and had to bye all the way to the finals. Like, this is a very legit Samsung team when they're on their game. But to Deficio's point, they were not on their game in the group stage, and it's a question of whether or not they can get back there with Ruler and Crown actually playing super well in the carry positions.
And they also weren't in the final day of the regular season. They got 2-0'd. It was pretty one-sided.
Yeah.
Longzhu did get the best of them there. I do think that Samsung is going to have their chances, but it does feel hard to look at this team and feel like there's a strong way in when Samsung showed weaknesses in a lot of different areas. It wasn't just, just their weaknesses in the early game. Even in their game, yes, it was a sub jungler, but even in their game against 1907 Fenerbahce, they almost lost a 50-minute game, right? So this is not just a case of, it was just RNG was able to exploit this one tiny weakness. They showed weakness in a lot of their games, and across the board, most people would take Khan over Cuvée. The bottom lane.
That's a debate, though. That's a debate.
That's a debate. That's probably the closest. But the bottom lane, I think you would say, is heavily
definitely
Longzhu
the
favored.
Oh, yeah. Oh my God.
Mid lane, you're looking at BDD,
Yes.
who's been so incredibly good. So it's hard to find the ways in for Samsung, and that's why I think it has to come through strategy. It has to come through pre-planning and team play.
That's been one of the things, talking to everybody here at this tournament, though, if you're going down the line like that, talking about this Longzhu team, stacking them up against any other team, seed 2, seed 1, regardless, pretty much every single person I talked to has been like, yes, I'm putting Longzhu in to win the whole tournament. And they look at me like that's some big thing, like, ooh, not SKT. I'm like, yeah, that's what
they got the best players in
said.
like 4 of their roles. Something would be pretty good.
And they match up so well against Samsung because Kaz in the jungle, who's been the weak link, if you look at the summer split, who some teams, if they're good early games, kind of exploit him as well, and then suddenly Khan couldn't get as fed as he wanted to, and they wouldn't have the same kind of punch. Ambition do not punish other junglers very well, at least.
At all.
He's so slow in the way he's playing, and he's not gonna invade you and like shut you down. And Samsung won't have the early game to stop Longzhu from really getting the snowball going. And Longzhu is as good as Samsung, I feel, right now when it comes to late game team fighting. So I'm missing the win condition for Samsung.
Yeah. And I'm so conflicted on Ambition because he doesn't shut down the enemy jungler. He feels like a first blood magnet in a lot of their games where he's not doing anything. He's also being the first one to die. But then you look at the team when he's not in there, and they're atrocious. So, like, clearly he is adding something good to that team, but it does not manifest in, like, early gameplay. He looks like a bad jungler
You guys are
in
just
game.
flaming my boy Ambition. All I remember.
How is he your boy?
That
Swift was your boy.
I have a lot of boys, okay? All I remember is that Kazakh's game where he's got Galio and Lulu on his team. He's in there with a double kill on the back line, pulling out, like, some very, very...
He's had some big-ass teamfight moments.
mechanically intensive plays, like...
He jumped in on
gonna be
Kha'Zix
just
and pressed
fine.
Q. That was nuts.
No. He did more than that. He had to stealth into the back of the Raptor pit, wait till the end, get the second execute, jump on out. Go back and watch the replays.
Okay,
You'll
okay.
become a fan.
Okay.
He'll be your boy as well.
Okay.
We're going to do some fancy predictions.
I think it's Longzhu.
So,
And then I'm going to do a stare at you like Kobe's doing.
for this one, do we want... How about, say if you're going to predict Longzhu to win the entire tournament rather than even this matchup. I feel like that's more interesting.
Okay.
And then you're allowed to change your prediction based
Next
on
week, based on
new
results.
stuff that you see.
You're allowed to have take
Yeah.
backsies.
But like, yeah, I think that would be
Which
one.
should be banned from the analyst desk. All the flip
take
flopping.
backsies? I think
Well,
it's fine.
So
It is
it's fine, but I don't think you get any credit for it.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
you should get 0 credit for your flip flop.
Everyone's claiming they like pick literally every team in the group to make it out of groups throughout their flip flops in the day, and then they're like, exactly, I was right. I got it.
I mean, it's the same as when we have some of our predictions where we're going like, I like this team more than the other team. They're going to win. It's like, you don't get credit for liking one team more than the other team
You
either.
Misfits will make it through because of the schedule. All teams play the same teams.
Well, prediction for Longzhu. SKT.
There is a chance that Samsung upsets them, right? Like, this is not a free win in any way for Longzhu.
Is it a destroyer jacket to Tibbers bet?
No, not even close.
I won that
it's
bet,
not
by
even
the
same,
way.
It's not close to the same ratio. Like, this is like a 65-35 game, but if they win this one, like, I do think they would be the odds-on favorites to win Worlds.
Yeah.
So Longzhu will win Worlds.
I say Longzhu will win Worlds and they will beat Samsung 3-0.
But did you see the interview where Koma said, "We just use group stage to find our weaknesses,
So did Longzhu,
so that
man.
we can be a better." And then Longzhu used group stage to do that, and they found no weaknesses.
They're like, great, keep doing
Oh
this.
yeah, guess there's nothing
Really
wrong
strong.
here. Gigabyte Marines, take your best shot. Ooh.
Just to add quick context to my 3-0 here, I think it's really hard to judge which Samsung will show up. And we don't have access to their preparation, their scrims or anything. So I can't, like, from everything I've seen so far, I have to put this on Longzhu. I think stylistically they match really well against Samsung. I'm missing Ruler being this insane late game carry who you can just put on a Twitch or something, and he will take you all the way to the final at the moment. If they show up, it might be a close series. I hope that, but I think it's going to be 3-0.
Yeah, I mean, I think Longzhu's going to win for sure as well. I still have some faith in SKT. I kind of want to reserve judgment on who's going to win Worlds until I see SKT's first series. I mean, it is against,
Just say
it is
Misfits.
against Misfits, but well, then if I had to call now, I'd still bet on SKT. I think I just have so much faith in how they perform in the clutch moments, how they improve from groups to best of 5, and like the historical precedent of this team. It's not an accident that they've won 2 in a row, 3 of the last 4. This team is so good when it counts.
Yeah, I mean, as you're saying all these things, I'm remembering how I fell in love with Prey and Gorilla last time around, and they had their shots at the King.
Yeah.
I do think it's a better shot this time around, though.
So do I.
That might just be because I already know the results of last time, and there's no way it's going to be an even.
They were so close in the
Even
semifinals.
comparison.
I mean,
last
a
time.
lot
know.
of people
Series
were
was
saying
insane.
Rocks would win last time, right? And
Yeah.
then
It's a very close BO5.
It was very close, right? And then it was interesting because when SKT then got to the finals, everyone's like, well, rip Samsung, they're going to get slammed, right? It's too bad we had the good matchup in the semifinals and blah, blah, blah. And that was a 3-2 as well. So, certainly teams can challenge SKT, and this may be the year that they get beat. But anyway, this is...
Kobe, you're Longzhu.
I am also going to go Longzhu.
Will win Worlds.
I had to choke it out there, but yeah, I think Longzhu also are going to win Worlds.
Yeah, I think that transitions right into our next best of 5, which is SKT versus Misfits. And I do find this one interesting, mainly because even though SKT says they use group stage to find their weaknesses, and the history of them winning every single series they've ever played at the World Championship since 2013 is rather daunting to go up against, they did look wounded in the group stage, and they did look wounded for much of the LCK regular season. We had that whole thing, multiple episodes of The Dive, like, will SKT make Worlds? And in retrospect, it's like the obvious answer is yes, but there were a lot of close moments along the way, like reverse sweeping SKT, not being good in the regular season, having extremely weak early games in the group stage, like monumentally weak against EDG, but still pulling out victories.
That's the thing. They always seem to come up clutch, right? It's always... So people
But
talk
how
about...
long can that go on for? Because
I don't know. I mean, until it works until it doesn't. It's one of those things where I almost have to see them lose before I'll believe they'll lose, because they're the only team.
Didn't work against Longzhu in the final.
Because
No,
it's
it
becoming more extreme, right? Like, it's not like they're coming back from 2,000 gold leads and then winning. There'll be like 5,000 gold leads and 10,000 gold leads. And eventually it reaches a point, you would think, when it breaks, unless they just clean up the early game and then become SKT again. That's what I think they're going to have to do.
And that's why I was saying, I kind of want to reserve judgment on who I actually think is going to win until after the quarterfinals, because it's one of those things where they've shown so many weaknesses that I am starting to really doubt that they can actually clean it up, because they had very close games. They had very losable games against everyone in their group. Even the last C9 game, I think that if a better team was playing C9's comp from that position, then they lose that game. They lose both the EDG games. They lose a lot of those games, right? If they are playing against, if Longzhu sits down at the other team's computers with those leads, you don't pick SKT to come back, but it's SKT that you say, with the nameplates off, you say they lose. With the nameplates on, you're like, well, they can come back.
I'm actually really excited for this matchup, SKT versus
Yes.
Misfits, to see how far Misfits can push SKT in the early game. Because Misfits, they have already shown us they're picking Thresh, they're picking Blitzcrank. They will dive bottom with 4 people at I don't forget the time frame, but it was very early in the game.
Yeah.
These are the types of things, like, these guys are gonna swing for the fences. So that's why you're excited to see this, even though it's heavily favored for SKT. You definitely want to see how quickly can SKT turn this around, because it's kind of feels like how how well will SKT be able to turn this around and win, later
Rather
in the game.
than will they.
Yeah, rather than will they be able to come out ahead on this matchup.
But I really like this Misfits team and the way they push the envelope on you. That is the question, though. Like, is this a good matchup or a bad matchup for SKT? Because Misfits blew early game lead against Team WE
And TSM.
and also against TSM, but they got so many early game leads. So you're thinking if someone is to beat SKT, it's someone who can blow the game open in the early game and then close. Misfits has one of those two things down pat as far as getting the early game done.
I mean, SKT, though, has this history of always coming back in against teams that most people would put above the Misfits, like EDG, right? EDG in second week looks so good, but SKT still able to find that fight and come back. And I do think it will be a very exciting game. In particular, I really kind of have my eyes on Maxlor because I think Maxlor has been an absolute star throughout this tournament. I think that the play, not only his individual play, but the way the team actually works around him. When you look at the Blitzcrank game, how heavily they invaded, how Maxlor was able to take over the enemy jungle on Jarvan. When you look at the tiebreaker game against TSM, I think that his pathing up to top lane, shutting down the Jace was really
Keep talking about Maxlor.
I think that decided the entire game.
Join
right?
my Maxlor fan club. I
already
tried to invite you
signed
guys
up.
before Worlds. You didn't
Deficio.
sign up yet.
Did you try? You did not sell us on him.
I told you guys. First of all, in the group door show, there is proof of me
Okay,
saying
I'll check the tapes.
Maxlor
I
is
was not
the
on the
guy
group chat
who
show.
can do something here from
Said
Misfits.
the guy to watch.
The guy who can do something here from Misfits. And also the preparation
He
is
can
really
do
good.
something.
Hey, I mean, I can't tell you
That's
he's the best jungler in the world
maybe,
yet.
Maybe he tried to sell you, but he's just a shit salesman.
I'm probably a bad salesman here, but like Maxlor in Europe
He's great.
was great. He's a superstar in the making
And
for
he
sure.
has played so well at Worlds.
Would you say he's your boy?
He is my boy. You can get Ambition and whatever other junglers you have. I'm taking Maxlor for now.
How many chicken nuggets would you give him if he wins this series?
Oh, so first of all, if he wins the series, I have to call him Lord Maxlor for the entire spring split.
I heard about this.
And I'll also give him 200 chicken nuggets.
That's a lot.
His coach gave him 100. I'll give him 200.
Okay.
About the matchup, though, I'm with you guys. Like, I absolutely love the Misfits early game. I think SKT, they're basically telling the truth when they're saying, yeah, group stages, it's BO1s,
Yep.
we're kind of learning and doing our
and
things.
they
Like,
pick generic stuff and then out team fight you.
I think they're going to show up big time and be super, super good. I have a lot of faith in especially Huni up in the top lane as well, who I think has been playing really well. And as long as the rest of the map doesn't fall behind early, Huni will get his advantages.
Yeah.
And while Misfits can probably gank Faker, who has overextended quite a lot the last, year even, and you can actually try and get a few kills on him early. He's never out of the game, which is a problem because that means you don't suddenly get the big advantage in the late game either. But if Maxlor and Power Weevil together can get ahead mid, they can use that to go top lane and kill Huni or go bot lane and try and kill, SKT's bot lane there and try and get this early lead. I feel like this is where game one is the most important one for Misfits to get a big advantage and try and close the game. If that doesn't happen, we know for game 2 and 3, SKT just start taking over completely and kind of read what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's all they do in group stage as well, is just read what you're doing. It's what they do in game 1 of series. And as much as it's fun to talk about the possibilities of the ways that Maxlor or Misfits can match up against SKT, if they were to pull off this upset, it would be one of the largest, if not largest,
I think
upsets
it would be the largest.
in the history of League of Legends. And it would be so meaningful for the European LCS and Misfits, because even in the year when 2015, when Origin and Fnatic made semifinals, they both got double 3-0'd by the Korean teams. This would be Misfits' chance to make such a meaningful mark if they could take down SKT in this quarterfinal, which is a cool thing to bring into it. And I think they are a team that has the mental strength to do that. They do not feel defeated going into this best of 5, where so many Western teams I've talked to before, best of 5s against Korean teams, have already been checked out. They don't even think they have a chance. Misfits at least thinks they have a chance, which is what you need.
Yeah, from talking to them, they were basically saying they were actually happy they got SKT out of the first seeds they could get because of SKT's struggles in the early game. They're like, there is an opening for us.
Yeah.
Obviously,
something to attack.
Exactly. Obviously, Misfits' late game has not been the strongest during all of Summer Split even. So that is a big issue against probably the best defending team ever. But at least there is something they can look to try and attack.
And something that I kind of wanted to give credit to for SKT is I actually think that not a lot of people have been talking about Bang and Wolf in the bot lane, and I felt like so many of their comebacks were actually through the bot lane, through Bang being able to find farm, through him always being able to stay relevant no matter what the matchup, despite maybe the EDG game. I guess iBoy slammed him harder in lane that I've really seen, but that's maybe the one exception. And I feel like in general, he's so consistent, and I really prioritize consistency from an AD carry because especially in this meta, it's just everything. Your AD carry wins and loses you the game, right? They have an incredible play, they win you the game, they die, from mispositioning or from poor summoner spell usage or whatever, and they lose you the game. And Bang is a guy to me where I watch him and almost never do I think that he loses your team the game. And he's so incredible in those team fights once he has his items. So to me, he's one of the world's best at playing the style that SKT has been showing.
And I feel like if you mention Bang, you have to mention Wolf because as Bang is this consistent AD carry, Wolf is the man with these amazing engages that have saved games on the big stage. He did it again here at Worlds with their Rakan engage to make that comeback. This 10,000 gold, EG swarming, knocking at the gates here. And SKT as a whole, I don't want to discredit Huni with the flash silence on his Cho'Gath, and there were other pieces to this. But Wolf definitely does deserve his credit.
Yeah, so obviously a lot of players we're talking very highly of, but then I think the junglers are kind of where there is a lot of criticism to be given, especially Peanut, who, as a product of how SKT plays the game,
it's like a sad story.
He lost the flashiness. He's lost that, like, the thing that made Peanut so fun to watch. Watching him just kind of walk around warding a little bit on a Gragas and then wait for a team fight is a little bit sad. And I think Blank is the better jungler for them at the moment. And he probably comes in after the first game because he's then studied whatever the enemy jungler is doing. And then kind of can carry it home for SKT.
And I definitely agree that Blank looked better than Peanut in the games. And it's kind of weird to me to say that because I don't think anyone would have come close to that statement last year when Peanut was playing on rocks. And to me, it's not that Peanut has gotten worse. To me, it's that this is what Peanut is being told is needed from the team, right? For the style that they are playing. So, I kind of want to measure some of the criticism a little bit because it feels like there's a lot of talk about, well, yeah, Peanut doesn't do anything. I don't think it's that Peanut doesn't feel like he can do anything. I think it's that they want someone defensive. They want someone moving around the map warding, which I think he has done very, very well. And they want someone there to maybe counter gank. And basically, they're just saying, keep the game even. We're going to win later.
Again, it comes back to that same story that we had at the very beginning of the show where we're talking about how you play League of Legends as a team. And I kind of want to make like, okay, if it's a chess analogy and your whole team is on this one side of the chessboard, and each of the 5 champions is one piece.
I follow so far.
Yeah. This is gonna be a risky one. So each of the players does have to move each piece. So like Peanut has to move his pawn, and Faker has to move his king. They have to be the one to touch it. However, it's up to all of them talking to each other behind and communicating as to which move the team is going to make, even though that individual player has to move the piece.
Yeah. Assuming it's really hard to move chess pieces.
And then the coach is also there, and there's like this big party. Yeah.
The coach chooses if you're a pawn or a knight.
And sometimes you don't get to communicate, and they just have to do it by reflex. And yeah, it's a beautiful analogy.
Okay.
And Peanut is on a different chessboard this year. So it doesn't look as good.
Peanut's
Kobe, your
playing-
analogy doesn't work.
You ruined it.
Your analogy doesn't work.
He's playing checkers.
It was fine till you touched it.
Anyway, do you want to do predictions?
So I want to do predictions, but I also want to ask you guys, if this is like a dominating 3-0 from SKT, does it change your opinion at all for SKT's chances going forward? As far as the Longzhu prediction, if SKT comes out and wins all 3 early games and has a 3-0, are you then like, oop, take it back, SKT wins Worlds?
No,
only
from
if
my
that's
side.
Only if that's coupled with some errors from Longzhu in their series too, right?
Okay.
I think the problem is just again with Misfits, it's the fantastic story of them, getting out of this group and moving into play SKT. Like, it is so hard to actually judge if they will really challenge SKT. And if SKT are winning the early games, is that then because SKT is back at the peak level, or is it that Misfits are just outclassed?
Even though C9 was able to win some early games and whatnot and
sure,
do pretty well.
We're moving again from the group stages into now the best of 5, where it's getting really serious for these guys. And we know they always kick it up a bit in terms of their overall level. So I don't think this series alone will change my mind. It will definitely make me more convinced Samsung will win Worlds if SKT are struggling in this series.
You mean Longzhu?
Longzhu.
Sorry, that Longzhu will win Worlds if SKT are struggling against Misfits, even if they still win, but if they have a hard time doing it. I think their potential semifinal against without spoiling any predictions, but most likely could be RNG. That is the one that really is telling for SKT's level.
Yeah.
Shall we just move on to the RNG Fnatic
Yeah.
then? I assume everyone's
I think the
predicting
odds-on
SKT.
prediction is 3-0, but I think there's a real chance it's like 3-1 or 3-2, depending on how Misfits can jump out early. But yeah, RNG Fnatic.
Hype.
Fnatic, double tiebreaker. The first time in the history of worlds that we had a three-way tie at 2-4. And then Fnatic really did come together on the last day. But then you're looking at RNG, who smashed through the group stage, beating Samsung twice and looking pretty awesome.
And it's pretty crazy because no one had ever come back from 0-3. Fnatic came back from 0-4 and made it out of the group. So, very, very strong last day. They went from 0-4 to 4-4 when you take the tiebreakers into consideration. And they certainly do have the momentum going. And when you talk about mentality, they have to be feeling so good after that second week.
But what? Don't keep going. And when you mention mentality with both of these teams, so much history, so many things come up. Fnatic, we're always talking about how emotional these players are. So I had a very long career, Reckless as well.
Uzi.
Uzi on the other side for RNG, and there's been so many heartbreaking reverse sweeps. All these really intense emotional moments have occurred for both of these teams in their histories. I just thought that was such a good thing to like slip in there, but very loaded.
Yeah. And I mean, it's going to be, I think, a lot of people with eyes on the bot lane because this is two of the most popular AD carries in the entire world. Reckless and Uzi going up against each other. I know immediately after the draws for quarters, so many people on Twitter I saw saying they're so hyped to watch just even that specific matchup, which will really be crazy. And I think because it's at China, there's always the thought of the Cinderella story. Uzi's never even won a regional title, let alone a world title. What if he can go all the way? When they're in the group against the Korean team, they beat Samsung both times. You start to maybe believe a bit that this team is that good. And, it'll be really exciting to see how well they can do against Fnatic, because I think it's, again, one of those situations where you talk about if SKT, shows weaknesses against Misfits, you really start to have more confidence in Longzhu. Well, likewise, if RNG does not look very dominant here, I think you really start to doubt their chances in any potential semifinal.
Yeah, I will say RNG is the non-Korean team I'm the most hyped about if I look back at the last few years at Worlds and now this year as well, in terms of the actual chances of doing serious damage in a best of 5, and especially against a team like SKT, where it might go down to just multiple late game situations, and you have these Uzi versus the other big superstars. But regarding the matchup specifically, I mean, again, emotions is so important because there's so much pressure on RNG in China, who draws a team that was 0-4 in their group, who in this quarterfinal here, like everyone is like RNG is gonna win this. Everyone is expecting that. Uzi's been in that position before, and then sometimes the pressure can be too much. But I feel like he has enough experience to kind of handle it. And the same thing for Reckless though, because while Fnatic technically go in and shouldn't actually feel too pressured, I know Reckless will, because he's such a proud player who wants to show up big time against Uzi, against RNG, and for the European fans. So he is the guy who will be like super pumped. And I think if he has a good first game, Fnatic can do some serious damage in this series. But if Fnatic lose the first game, I can see them kind of crumble.
And why I have faith in RNG has to do with the way they performed on the final day of group stage. Because there are really volatile environments, you feel like, for both of these teams, with the reverse sweep in the final for RNG. But when we talk about their ability to, come back from deficits within the game sometimes and actually ward and play defensively, the fact that they lost the first game of the day to G2, then bounced back and beat Samsung in the last game of the day, makes me feel like this team is less tiltable than I had previously thought, which does give me more confidence for them going in.
All right, here's some more reasons to get excited for RNG. And I know Uzi's the best and all that, but Xiaohu, Deficio, we had a very big love affair with Xiaohu leading into what was it, Rift Rivals?
Yeah.
2 years ago or something like that. This guy has been performing at such an outstanding level.
I think you meant MSI. But
MSI, that's what I meant. Yeah. Not Rift Rivals. But also the fact that this team is actually extremely versatile. They played Galio 2 times mid, 1 times top. They play Rumble top. A lot of the LPL teams have been doing that. They were able to get Janna the majority of their games, which might just be intelligent drafting with the way that the tournament is going. But the fact that they can play those big Wombo combo comps you remember from the LPL where they have Galio and Jarvan and Rumble and they're just absolutely blowing you up with this huge combo, or they are playing back for the late game for Uzi and he's cleaning up these team fights around Baron. I don't know. I'm as well pretty hyped up for the team.
Yeah, I'm definitely very hyped about RNG. The one thing I will say, unlike Longzhu, there's maybe one area that you can kind of target as far as the performance in group stage. You can say, so while they executed very well, on average, all their players are down in gold at 15. This team traditionally has played very slowly, been not really behind, but a little bit behind in the earlier stages of the game. And then Uzi completes some items. They have incredible team fights, and they're able to actually blow up the lead basically. But for Fnatic, that gives you some hope that if Broxa can, either continue to get the Rek'Sai, or if he can actually add some additional early game picks, which I think he'll have to do because I'm assuming that'll be targeted picks and bans. But if you can add in the Lee Sin or maybe a Nidalee or something along those lines, if you can have, or as a Elise, some early game picks, if you can attack the bot lane, if you can turn that slight CS disadvantage on Twitch or whatever into a big deal because you can pull off some dives, because you can pull off these early plays, that's a way that Fnatic could then maybe actually take over and win some of these team fights that RNG is going to try to force as soon as Uzi has his items.
Yeah, and doubling up on the first blood or on the RNG early game point, MLXG had 70% of first bloods in the LPL, which was like insane. And I kept talking about watch how this guy's going to get first blood. He got 1 in 6 games. Their team only got 1 in 6 games, so they haven't been doing that well in the early game. But okay, how realistic is it? Or 85-15 for this for RNG? I actually think it's still going to be very one-sided. For as much as this can be tiltable on both sides, and as much as Reckless versus Uzi is super hype and could be very close, this was a 5-1 group stage team, and Fnatic did pull it together at the end to make those tiebreaker wins against Immortals and Gigabyte Marines happen, but they were a 2-4 group stage team. It would be, I think, such a monumental upset if Fnatic is able to pull this one out.
It's definitely a big upset. It's a smaller upset than if Misfits are beating SKT.
Correct.
The way I look at it.
I agree.
I definitely want to see RNG without the Janna, so there's a little bit less protection. I think in playoffs we're going to see more like Lulu Janna just banned away completely, and you got to find some of the other supports to play. Just there's a little bit less protection. For Uzi specifically, stylistically, just going player for player as well, I think Fnatic are not in a huge disadvantage, which is very good for them because, again, their star player is the AD carry, matches up against Uzi in that sense, but obviously Uzi will have higher highs. Top lane as well, it's very much a tank fight versus each other. Brox is an early game jungler. MLXG has kind of gone away from that side, but we know he can go back towards it. So I definitely see Fnatic come in and try and play really fast and try and get early leads, and it might actually be successful. I don't think they're going to win late game team fights against this RNG lineup. And that's why I also think RNG will be the favorites in this matchup.
So a big difference between week 1 and week 2 for Fnatic was also Soaz play. He had an outstanding week 2. So I think also a lot of it hinges on how much is Soaz going to carry over, because it does seem, we talk a lot about the mentality and the morale of this team, that he's kind of been reinvigorated.
Exactly, and Source is one of the most vocal members on Fnatic. When he has a good game, a lot of the team is playing much better. I also want to highlight Caps specifically. I think he also had a much better week too, and Caps and his story on Fnatic in the summer split is so interesting because there are certain weeks where you don't see anything from him and everything is going wrong, and you're just like, man, why is Caps playing like this? It's so weird, and they're not even ganking for him or doing anything with him. And then suddenly they realize for 1 week, maybe we should go mid lane here.
That's pretty good.
They get Caps rolling. He takes over the game completely. And you're just like, that's really good. But then they stop doing it again. And it really depends on the comp for them and on the day, really, for Fnatic. I want to see them play around Caps in the early game, get him ahead of Jahu if you can, and use him to then go bot lane and try and see if you can get Reckless ahead.
And I think the biggest trick will be not just getting CS advantages. You need to get more than that, right? Because while RNG has been behind in the early games, they are barely ever dying in the early games, right? So you need to be able to actually capitalize on it. You need to be able to get kills. You need to be able to take turrets, because I agree that in even game or a close-ish game, Fnatic shouldn't win those late game team fights against RNG. But if you could get to those team fights with a significant advantage, then you have, I think, much more of a chance, right? You really do start to actually build up an opportunity for yourself.
So what is your prediction?
In
games, I think we're all going to go RNG.
I think
game score.
We need a game score here.
Yeah.
I think Fnatic could win a game if Roxa can play that early style and snowball a game. Like, I'll give them one, but I do think that it's heavily RNG favored, so I'd say 3-1 RNG.
I'm going 3-1 RNG as well. Yeah, 3-1 is always the easy one, being like, it's not super stomp, but it's they win a game. I think a lot of the games will be fairly competitive, though. I just think RNG have actually shown they understand resetting for vision much better in the late game than I've seen previously from LPL teams. They're actually able to get really good vision control down around Baron and not kind of get surprised by people rushing a Baron. They don't see anything. And I don't think they're just relying on forcing team fights anymore, which is a big difference.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that point. Specifically the game where Uzi on his Tristana, like they push down the turret super early and immediately BF sword recall, he goes back. They get this. That was one of the only games actually that they actually had a good early game, but they did basically the tower crushing strategy, which is Tristana rather than Caitlyn. I'm also gonna go 3-1. I don't know if Jad's gonna have a different prediction to shake it up.
Got a bunch of sheep on this desk. Now, I mean, I think there are ways it goes 3-1, but I'm gonna say 3-0 because I think this is a litmus test for RNG's chances of actually winning the World Championship. Because if they can't beat Fnatic in all 3 games, they're not beating SKT and they're not beating Longzhu, right? So if they go 3-1, then I'm doubting them the next week once SKT makes it through. I think they should be able to dominate a team that went 2-4 at the start of group stage.
Yeah, I mean, they should be able to, definitely. And again, they should be able to once again show us that they don't need to win the early game to do well. Because in the LPL, one of my concerns regarding RNG coming into the tournament was like, I feel like a lot of things were just so random. It was so like, it was 50-50s. They were just constantly we got to land this one engage tool, otherwise we're never going to get a fight here, and then we're just going to lose like 2 towers, and then they would land it or not, and they would win games, lose game on it. Players were really random in MLXG, had level 2 ganks to level 3, 4, 5 ganks. The next game, he just failed the first gank, and he was out of the game basically from the get-go. We're not seeing that RNG anymore. They're more consistent. They rely more on the late game fights. They have really good mid laner, fantastic AD carry, and Ming the support as well. On these defensive supports like Janna and Lulu are playing extremely well and very rarely getting caught out and dying, which is what some of the supports are actually doing right now, where you catch them first and kill them. Almost never happens with him. So you have these super solid late game fights with actually also more of an understanding of how to play the game, and that makes RNG a scary team.
For sure. I just wanted to go back to your point again for a second, Jad, about Fnatic and the 2-4 group stage record, because I think that while obviously they did have a really poor start, the second week was so much better. And
it was.
Just to ask you, like, if you would feel the same way about EDG, right? If EDG was in the quarterfinals, because they looked really bad week 1, they went 2-4 in groups, but that's a team that I felt, had they made it out, could have really done some damage in groups. So it's like,
that's interesting because it depends on who they're winning the tiebreakers against, right? And how those teams look when they're winning the tiebreakers. So like Gigabyte Marines and Fnatic versus like if EDG beats
C9.
SKT, then they're 3-3. But if they'd beaten C9 and AHQ, who had taken a game off of SKT, I would say I would be more hyped for them based on that. But yeah, I mean, you're basically judging Fnatic on the second week. So it's the team that went 2-1 in regulation, lost to Longzhu, beat the other 2 guys convincingly, which makes them stronger. But I still think if RNG is to win Worlds, it's the needing to dominate this Fnatic team.
I would challenge the convincingly, especially because the Immortals game they won that started the whole winning streak, they were basically done. That game was over until the very famous play in the bot lane with, I'm just going to say it because I got 3 NA casters here, let's go through the play super quickly.
Okay.
Flame walks under the tower for absolutely no reason, gets absolutely chain CC'd, and Nautilus pulls him back in.
Nautilus.
He was diving in Nautilus.
When the turret was 3 hits away.
Exactly.
And the mid lane inhibitor was down and they had Baron.
And they had the better late game teamfight comp. So they didn't need to do any of that. So they did it, fight starts, he dies. Immediately right after, their support drops.
Why are you doing this?
With flash and everything ready, he dies
He's
instantly.
Just trying to tilt us.
And then we get the famous.
It's working.
Then we got the Cody Sun play. That meant Fnatic just finished the Nexus. The last second they could have finished the Nexus, they killed it. Otherwise, they would have lost right there at the Nexus again.
A Janna auto post polymorph.
Cody
Exactly.
Sun also
You're
had
not
his
telling
ultimate
us.
No, he
when
did
he
not. He did not.
checked?
I actually went back.
Okay,
There's 5
okay,
seconds
okay.
on it. But They win that game. They get so much confidence. Regulus is screaming on stage. It's amazing.
Is
and
it
then they
safe
start
to
winning
say-
every game.
Is it safe to say that Immortals and Cody's son untilted Fnatic?
Started with Flame. But then,
It started with Flame.
Immortals untilted
It
Fnatic.
started with Flame.
Maybe someone told him to go for that tower dive, but then the chess piece has still had to move.
There we go. There we go.
All right,
Anyway,
we're done with this. I like your story,
Last series.
Deficio. That was really fun to
Yeah,
relive that.
I loved it.
Let's move
That's
on.
why EU is greater than NA. This
There we go.
Team WE versus Cloud9.
Is this the easiest looking first seed? And
Yes.
does that make this the closest matchup? Because the second seed definitely varies a lot as well.
Yeah.
So does everyone think that WE is the easiest looking first seed?
Yes.
I think that the only other contender would be RNG.
You gotta-
but I think that I do.
You
I think
have
WE
to
is
say
the
yes.
easiest.
so
Yeah.
based on group stage performances, SKT needs to be in this debate because of a lot of the shaky plays they had. But because they are SKT and they have historically always shown up much better
Right.
in playoffs, they obviously go above Team WE in this case here.
Exactly. Even just basing it off of like regional strength, the other seeds are the Korean teams who are super strong or the team that beat a Korean team twice. So like based on that, yes. But then when you look at the performances in games, WE looked super good during the second week of group stage and has also been in here since the play-in stage, almost refining their strategy and being pretty consistent about the way they play. The answer is still yes, but it's close.
So you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah.
I would say so.
There's a chance.
Here's another way of looking at WE's week 2 performance to try and chip away at it, because it was extremely impressive. Now, if you're trying to find
Caitlyn.
holes here, exactly. Do you actually add a little bit less value as far as repeatability to the success of this team from their week 2 victories because of the power of this surprise pick, where it was amazing strategy, to pull this out, and they were able to get these 2 wins? Throwing that out there. What do you got
I think
for me?
you certainly can take a little bit away from that. The question is, do you take away from the actual execution of it, right? Because I think that like the pick itself, you can ban it out, you can take it away. It's going to be massively more contested. I think everyone is on the same page with that in quarterfinals. But what I will say is they executed it so incredibly well, and I think that just their overall team play looks so much better. And I also agree with you, Jet, that I think they have been refining their play from week to week to week. In play-ins, I was much less impressed with them than I was in week 1. In week 1, I was less impressed with them than I was in week 2. And it feels like this team is improving, is really kind of peaking at the right time. So, it just came down to me being more impressed with the execution in those Caitlyn games than the actual pick itself.
Yeah, and I love the NA hype you're dropping right now, Kobe.
Whoa!
I'm a big fan.
I'm not
You're
dropping any
loving
sort of
it.
hype.
You're just loving the hype. But I have been hot on this WE team since play-ins, right? Everyone was saying that they weren't doing well in play-ins. I was saying, dude, they still haven't lost a game. I predicted them before the group stage to come out first in that group. I predicted them after the second week to come out first
Did
in
you?
this group.
Before the group stage?
Yes! It was on the dive. You guys gave me shit for it.
I do think they underperformed in play-ins. As Mystic
Yeah.
specifically, as a team, I think they were underperforming. So I think they were.
Mystic even had the second worst CSD in the entire play-in tournament.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that WE did not look good in the play-ins, but I am fully in agreement
Anyway,
that they have looked great.
Bow down to Jack.
I have
Go
been
ahead.
on the Team WE hype train for a while. I think
What about the Maxla hype
as
train?
well. I'm now on that train.
There you go.
Yeah, I was not before. I'm on it now. But the 957 in the top lane, I think, is actually a really underrated player. Like, we talk about how this entire team works around Mystic, but what this team has been better at doing than any other team is making Mystic succeed, but also completely destroying the enemy AD carry. And I feel like that's usually 957 doing it, whether it's a rumble ult straight on his face into always flashing directly towards the AD carry to take him out of the fight, or just being Cho'Gath and playing the tank fight super, super well. That's where this team excels, which I am interested to see how that interacts with Cloud9, as Sneaky has been good, but is the lowest damage percentage AD carry from the group stages because they rely on contracts so much in team fights with his carry jungle picks. Like, how will those team fights interact when there's not this super clear point of focus that Team WE can play around? But I feel like because of the way they're playing around it, Team WE has understood the way the game is being played right now better than a lot of teams, which makes me super confident for them.
And I find it really fun in this matchup how C9 really wants to win mid lane, while WE wants to so badly win the bot lane. There's like just a little bit of a mismatch between them, and which team can get the one lane ahead, the fastest might be something that decides a lot in this series. Looking at the late game though, and I've talked to you guys about this before, I favor WE quite a lot in this series, because I look at contracts on these like different carry junglers, and it's so hard to execute them late game. And I think Mystic is better than Sneaky as well.
I think that's goes without saying, because Cloud9 have been 100%. Most of their game plans have been all early game oriented, right? They're drafting early game teams. They're all playing for an early game strategy. So I agree with you. I think that in the late game, teams.
Thank you. I was very nervous here with that point.
I don't think it's like this big. Jump or leap or whatever to say.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Even in the C9 SKT game in week 2, where I felt C9 had the stronger late game comp, they had outscaled, they had all the tools they needed to win. They could not actually match up with SKT's late game, calling their map movements and everything. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that their late game is nearly as strong. Where I do give C9 some credit, and where I do give them some chances to win games in this series, is drafts, is planning, is innovation, because I do think that they have had their own ideas about what works. I think Reaper is a very smart coach. They have been unafraid to bring out things like the Graves and the Ezra, which has worked some, has failed other times, but they haven't shied away from that. And, if Caitlyn is going to be such a big pick in this series, maybe C9's a team to actually come out with an answer to that pick instead of shying away from it. If it goes up enough in priority that you can make a team just blind pick the Caitlyn, as we haven't been seeing so far, then you can answer that with things like Dash. Then you can answer that with other picks. And I think a lot of the ways that I give a C9 a chance in this is through the draft, because even in their one win that they got in week 2, I felt it was massively through the draft. It was through preparation, and that to me is their biggest strength.
I think it's also very important to highlight that Team WE, when they play back in China, very often like draft super scaling, do not do too many things in the early game. And there was this meme like a year ago how they relied on like stealing Barons to get back in the games with Condi, and it's obviously
son of Baron.
The son of Baron. Like, it's not that bad anymore by any means, but they still definitely have a lot of those habits back in the LPL. But on the international stage, both MSI now and Worlds here, we see them go much more for early game as well. But when it comes down to this draft, I can actually see a world where WE are drafting too much scaling. They are giving over the early game, especially the mid lane, to Jensen and C9, and WE are just like losing everywhere on the map and have to play super defensive. Misfits actually did that against them here in week 2, but then obviously WE's late game was superior and they came back in the game. But I can definitely see C9 get these early leads and really challenge them. I don't think this is a super one-sided series, even though I have Team WE as the favorites to win. I definitely think C9 will do some damage to them and really make them work hard to actually win these games.
Actually, I do think it is actually probably the closest series between them. You talked about 65-35 maybe in the Longzhu Samsung. I'd maybe put this around 60-40, not a lot better, but I do think that Cloud9 has some ways to win. And while WE has really impressed me, they did fall to G2 at MSI, in the LPL playoffs, despite the fact that, they have been talked about a lot as the best LPL team, despite being 13. They did lose in the LPL playoffs. So this is not a team without flaw. This is a team that, struggled to get to Worlds for a long time. And I think they have shown really strong form. But I do think that with a really good draft, with an advantageous draft, Cloud9 is good enough that if they get a big advantage, they could close where maybe some of the other teams haven't.
Yeah, so I'm going to say 3-1. I'm not super sold on a stomp by Team WE, but I do think they got a pretty good chance based on the stuff I said earlier.
I'm going 3-1 as well in this one to WE. I think they'll definitely drop a game.
I mean, I think WE is definitely going to win, and I want to say 3-2, but the only reason, to me, it comes down so much to the draft. So, it's much easier to just say 3-1. I think C9 will at least get one game. But I do think that if C9 is able to figure out advantageous drafts, then I give them more of a chance than that. But, assuming equal drafts, I think WE is certainly the superior team, and they're going to win.
Yeah, I am on the desk for this one, so I have to predict it for the
Give
audience
a different prediction
well.
now. Keep it in the dark.
There's just no way that I can not predict a WE victory here. I decided I'll predict the WE victory, and then I will tweet a hashtag C9 win after it, though.
Nice.
So
there we go. I have a question for you guys.
What score do you give it?
That's true. I I wanted to even lean towards the 3-2, but I think I would still go with the 3-1.
Yeah.
But I feel almost like guaranteed that Cloud9 will win at least one game.
So do I.
I feel like it's almost guaranteed that they're going to have something, one of these, they're going to snowball around mid lane. I think Xie, you can definitely try and take advantage of him. Jensen is definitely the guy to do it with contracts. It's going to happen at least once. I may end up going 3-2, but I don't know.
Right.
I mean, the thing about this playoff bracket we have now with the matchups, there's a good chance we get some actually surprisingly exciting series, but there's also a good chance we get just like 3-0s.
Scores.
And I look back at like some of the old playoff brackets from like last year and 2 years ago, and there was definitely not a case where I felt like all 4 matchups could just be 3-0s. When I looked at it there, I was like, no, surely there will be at least 1 or 2 games going to other teams. But I actually would not be surprised if our quarterfinals all end 3-0. I don't think it's super likely, but I would definitely not be surprised. And then it's WE, RNG, SKT, and Longzhu all 4 looking really good going into semis.
Yeah, and it's the nature of the format of why group stage matters. And group stage has just done 2 weeks of ranking these teams so that the number 1 seeds should win and should go to the semifinals, right? Last year, it was a combined score of 12-2 for the number 1 seeds. Like, it was close. The year before that, though, was a lot different. So, like, there has been years where it's gone differently. There were 2 upsets, so to speak, that year when Origin, a number 2 seed, took down Flash Wolves, and then also the Korea matchup went to the number 2 seed that year with KT Rolster and the Tigers. So the Korea matchup and one other one would be what we need to replicate that 2015 result.
And I'd also say, the fact that you're saying, yes, we've had these 2 weeks to actually rank the teams for number 1 and number 2 seeds. We had 0 tiebreakers for first place, right? There was never a time when it was 2 teams that were right there against each other and it came down to a final tiebreaker. In a case like that, you give, I think, more hope to that second seed because you're like, well, it's just the one game that really separated them. That never happened in any of these groups. We'd have some tiebreakers, but it was only ever for second place. They were closer to the third place team and the fourth place team than they were actually to that first.
Yeah, I'm hoping for close series, but mostly I'm hoping for more strategy, right? Because we saw some teams attempt other strategies that were failing for them and then be like, oh no, this isn't working. Let's try and do, side lane focus and we're going to play super aggressive, but then they weren't good at executing it, playing around the pressure that they drafted. Even if you decide, okay, we're going to go more early game now and you draft it, if you don't play well around that pressure, then, it's not going to matter. And that's one of the reasons also why I think that WE, have such a good chance here is that the execution, as Azale said, with a new strategy is such a big part. While Cloud9 could be like, oh, they did that. We could, either do that too or have a counter to that. And, executing on it that quickly in the best of 5 is
it's
daunting.
important. Yeah.
It's going to be very exciting. I'm excited for the matches to get started, but that's going to be doing it for the quarterfinal section. So we have a couple Twitter questions here from you guys. First one is from David Yoshimoto, and he asks, what champ will be this year's support MF? So obviously last year came out during the semifinals, was a shocking pick, counter to Zyra, which really only just started coming out in the quarterfinals, which was also kind of a shocking pick. So it'll be very interesting to see.
Yeah, so the lame answer I would have, because it's not going to be as surprising to support MF, would be like Ashe coming back in the meta. If people actually feel like you can blind pick Caitlyn, that just gets immediately blocked by Ashe, because if they're going to blind pick Caitlyn, they're probably going to ban Varus, but that's like a lame one. That's not even close to support MF. It's just a champion that I think could come back.
Are you going to offer a non-lame one later?
I'm going to think it's such a hard question, right? Because the reason support MF worked was because there was this dominant meta strategy of Zyra, and Misfortune could kill the plants faster than other support picks could, and it still fit in with everything else. So, like, we then need to think about exactly how the meta is working, and then also be able to think about the champion that can counter that meta. Because right now, we had a very slow week 1. It was 2 minutes faster in week 2 because people started making lane priority comps. So, like, the next evolution is it's either a power creep of lane priority to kill turrets, or it's a snapback of everyone pushing up all the time to try and counter that strategy.
I'm going to say Aurelion Sol.
Because?
I think Talia Galio right now are 2 of the most contested mid laners. One of the big reasons is, of course, their ability to impact other lanes very quickly, which has been a large part of this meta, but much less about the 1v1 in the mid lane itself. I think Aurelion Sol can do all of that. I think he is such an annoying pick to play against when it comes to kind of completely change the way you think in the game itself. Because when you play against Aurelion Sol, these lanes that you can normally push forward, maybe past the river, suddenly you can't because Aurelion Sol over the hill is just flying in and killing you. Level 2 roams, level 3 roams. Like, he's the kind of pick that can just completely disrupt this. Oh, it's Janna and Lulu just kind of trading farm in the bot lane. They can't defend themselves against an Aurelion Sol roam at all. They get bursted down, they get stunned, and then they die. I think he could be a pick that could really shake up how people are playing in the side lanes.
So one pick that we did see once in groups, I actually think Zillion could end up being something that's pretty key in the later stages. I felt like it was so effective when it did actually come out, and when you talk about this world where it's these AD carries, it's all about AD carries. It's about actually enabling the AD carry, having the ultimate either to shut down like burst centric strategies. Like if you are playing against a team like Longzhu, who has essentially this diving top laner who's trying to kind of one round your AD carry, bringing them back with the ultimate is super powerful. And I also think when you're in the world where it's a Maokai and a Cho'Gath just sitting in the front line and smacking each other and everyone has to kill that one guy, if you actually have a ton of AP on Zillion, you bring back up your front line, like that can really swing a fight. So could be pretty interesting.
Oh, I have another one actually. I think now that you mentioned the big tanks, Dr. Mundo.
Mundo's so good in these AP heavy comps.
Exactly. There are so many AP heavy comps right now where it's like it's a Gragas jungle, it's a mage in the middle, and it's a Maokai top or something. And I'm just like, Mundo's E, after we buffed it with the percent magic resistance it gives you, and the fact he actually deals pretty decent damage to tanks, I think he is a pick that could be really good.
I think that is a really good answer, especially because the LPL teams, there's 2 first seeds of them, and they were playing Rumble, and he's very good into Rumble. So
yeah, he smashes Rumble.
I really do like that. And that's a good answer, Deficio.
We found one.
I was gonna go third, and I was like grasping at straws because the other thing, like during the boot camp, I always try and look at the what's it called, tracking the pros or whatever, all their solo queues and stuff. And the other thing besides the top lane karma that you see there is Singed. A lot of the top laners are practicing Singed, but then after like getting here and asking people, they're all like, no, it's just not good. It doesn't do anything for you late game. You can't,
you can't team
you
fight.
can't split push. You can't team fight. So it's a good solo queue champion.
Something that could happen would be like Thresh Nidalee, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because Nidalee is I think actually a better application of offensive Ardent Sensor in the late game because you're also getting the attack speed from the Nidalee E. And if you can then win lane harder with it, it works. And Nidalee is a great early lane pressurer for the current meta as well. So that one, once again, none of these are ever going to be the level of support MF. Like you don't just get a support MF every single year.
Vel'Koz.
I'm
done now.
You NA guys always
Final
loved
point.
Vel'Koz.
Yeah. Because we have seen some good.
Because he's really good at it.
Exactly.
I was just going
You
to
watch him
say...
play a few games, you'll be a Vel'Koz fan too.
I watched the games. I watched it. Someone in Europe, Senkux, tried it as well, and it didn't work at all. And then he never played it again. But Alistar, I also think, should get played more.
All right, we're done here.
And that's it.
We just name every champion that we're like predicted it, just like the flip floppers on the desk. All right, now moving on. Momus the Mocker asks, any thoughts on 3 of the 4 play-in teams getting out of groups? Were these teams at an advantage? Does Riot need to rethink the format? To me, my quick answer is no. I don't think it's that they were at an advantage. I think that when you look at the strength that people thought of WE, a lot of LPL analysts had them as the best Chinese team. They lost a series in playoffs. That does not then necessarily mean that they're so much worse than these other teams and are just now this shit team because they're in play-in. Right. And likewise, Cloud9 historically has been the most successful North American team at Worlds. They're traditionally in the finals against TSM. They are a top team. They lost in playoffs. They still, I think, when given a bunch more games, have shown their strength to be greater than that of some of the other teams.
Yeah, well, I think that also does ask the question, though, like, does that mean that we need to rethink the format? Because, like, should they be in the play-in? Should they be a Pool 3 team? Like, I think generally the answer is yes, because Pool 2 and Pool 3 have less of a distinction when you're able to qualify from all the what would be questionable teams into Pool 3. But it's interesting, right? Because you look at the strength of Pool 3 that it ended up being with Team WE, Fnatic, C9, and then 1907 Fenerbahce, who was like the outsider. Like, 3 of those teams you could easily just see in Pool 2.
Well, they
Yes.
easily could have been that, right? I mean, Fnatic as well got upset in playoffs.
Yeah,
Right.
And if they are this strong, then they make it through the plans. I like the
exactly.
format. I
Me
like
too.
making them work their way through.
I just think that's what the question was essentially asking. So,
But
I think it's worth it.
I think to the point about the third seeds, like they were stronger this year than last year. Last year it would have been like IMA in there. It would have been Splice in there as well. Who was there? It was CLG. That was the NA third seed. Like those three.
CLG did pretty well though. They were one game. They beat Rocks and everything. They just lost twice to Wildcard.
Sure.
It was C9 as well last year.
Was it C9 as well
Because
last
CLG
year?
qualified on championship points.
Okay, so C9 as well. But especially like both IMA and Splice, I would consider weaker teams last year compared to WE and Fnatic this year. So that could have made it a lot closer in planes. Like the fact that LPL, the top teams are so strong right now, like that doesn't make planes less relevant. That WE are just really good, and so is RNG, and ETG towards the end also ended up playing really well. That's just again the region doing super well in playoffs.
Yeah, it just keeps the major regions honest, right, for their
Right.
third seeds.
And look at LMS, right? The LMS didn't actually get their representative out. So to me, it's a really cool format because the teams are actually earning their way in. You are maybe going to get one in, maybe you're going to get 4 extra in, right? And I think that when they actually prove that they can beat these top regions teams, they deserve those spots. And I, for one, really, really enjoyed watching play in as well.
And last little point on that, the weakest of the 4 teams who made it into the group stages ended up in the hardest group. So 1907 Fenerbahce obviously ended up in the G2 Samsung RNG group. I think had C9 or had Fnatic dropped into that group, if it was possible, they would not have made it out either. So suddenly we maybe would have only 2 teams from play-ins actually making out. But it was just Fenerbahce, who was the weakest, who ended up in the hardest group automatically.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the Twitter questions. Keep sending those to us between the week. Hashtag the dive lol on Twitter or tag Kobe, myself, or Azale. Not sure for Deficio next week. We're going to ask him later whether or not he wants to be here.
Depends on Europe's performance.
By the way, we just have to
They've
shout
done
out
great.
No, it's fine.
Vedius for filling in because he also predicted the group correctly.
Which group?
D.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
proud of Vedi. I'm proud. He's doing well.
Unlike today where we had all exactly the same predictions for who's going to go on. Anyway, thank you for listening to The Dive. Thank you for the questions. And we will see you next week for a quarterfinal recap and semifinal preview.